Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 576. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. We got a lot of news to talk about on today's show, really focusing on what Israel may do in response to the Iranian retaliation on Israel for the destruction of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. So some news there, and of course, what is happening in Gaza. Please share the show. It's hosted at the Libertarian Institute. We repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, or Odysee for the video version of the show. And it's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. Follow me on Twitter at KyleAnzalone_, where I post the show and everything else that I write. Let's get into the news today. But before we get into the news about Israel, I do want to mention this one from Brett Wilkins. We published it at antiwar.com on April 11th. Do the right thing, says Assange defenders as Biden mulls dropping case. U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday said his administration is weighing the Australian government's request to drop charges against WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, who has been deprived of his freedom since 2010 and is currently held in London's notorious Belmarsh prison while fighting his extradition to the United States. Asked by reporters at the White House about a request from the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and members of the country's parliament for the US and UK to drop the extradition effort and charges against Assange, who is an Australian citizen, Biden said we're considering it. Stella Assange, Julian's wife, responded to Biden's remarks on social media saying, "Do the right thing. Drop the charges. Hashtag free Assange now." A Croatian philosopher and co-founder of the Democracy in Europe Movement 2025 and is a member of the Pan-European Progressive Party, said this would be the best decision Biden ever made, and that seems pretty true to me. A British journalist asked, why has Assange been put through this ordeal in the first place? Again, another good observation. Assange, who is 52 years old and suffers from various health problems, faces multiple U.S. charges under the Espionage Act and Computer Fraud Abuse Act for his role in publishing classified documents, some of them revealing war crimes and other misdeeds. Among the files published by WikiLeaks are the collateral murder video, which shows a U.S. Army helicopter crew killing a group of Iraqi civilians, and the Iraq and Afghan warlords. 3 U.S. administrations have pursued charges against Assange during the administration of former President Donald Trump, who is the presumptive 2024 Republican nominee. Officials, including then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, allegedly plotted to assassinate Assange to avenge WikiLeaks' publication of the Vault 7 documents exposing CIA electronic warfare and surveillance activities. In 2010, Trump called for Assange's execution. The UK High Court ruled last month that Assange could not be immediately extradited to the US, where he faces up to 175 years behind bars if convicted on all counts. The tribunal gave the Biden administration until April 16th, which is actually today, to guarantee that Assange won't face the death penalty. Absent such assurances, Assange will be allowed to continue appealing his extradition. Last month, Assange's legal team denied reports that a plea deal with the U.S. government may have been in the works. Assange has been imprisoned in the Belmarsh since 2019. Before that, he spent nearly 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he had been granted political asylum under the government of the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention found in 2016 that Assange has been arbitrarily deprived of his freedom since he first was arrested on December 7, 2010. In 2019, Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, said Assange had been subject to psychological torture. Following the High Court's decision last month, Amnesty International legal advisor Simon Crowther said that the U.S. must stop the politically motivated prosecution of Assange, would push Assange and U.S. media freedom around the world at risk. So as always, if you haven't, if you know, call your congressman, talk to him about, supporting the House resolution on freeing Assange. Those kinds of things are really important, especially why Assange is still in the news. All right. So a couple stories here on, probably what the most important thing going on right now is the potential Israeli attack on Iran. So a report, Israel tells U.S. it has no choice but to respond to Iran. So Axios reported on Monday that the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin that Israel has no choice but to respond to Iran's missile and drone attack, which came in retaliation for Israel's bombing of the Iranian consulate in Damascus. Gallant and Austin spoke on Sunday after President Biden told the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that the U.S. would not support an Israeli attack on Iran. The U.S. is trying to portray the Iranian attack as a victory for Israel since most of the drones and missiles were intercepted with the help of the U.S., UK, and Jordan, although some of the missiles got through and damaged an Israeli airbase. But the U.S. is also reaffirming that it would continue to defend Israel if there is another escalation. According to the Pentagon, Austin told Gallant that the U.S. does not seek escalation, but the U.S. will continue to defend Israel. Israeli TV reported Monday that the Israeli War Cabinet had convened again and agreed to respond to the Iranian attack clearly and forcefully, but there were no details on what the response would look like. The report said that the attack was designed to send a message to Israel that Israel will not allow an attack of that magnitude against it to pass without a reaction. Israel has a long history of carrying out covert attacks inside Iran, including assassination, sabotage, attacks on energy infrastructure, and small drone attacks. If Israel wants to launch a more significant attack on Iranian territory, such as carrying out airstrikes, it would likely need support from the U.S. Israel also has a history of killing Iranians in Syria and could potentially opt to do that again. The bombing of the Iranian consulate marked a huge escalation since it targeted a diplomat facility and killed a senior Quds Force commander and 6 other members of the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, as well as, I think, 9 innocent Syrian civilians. Iran is usually very restrained in its response to Israeli attacks, if it responds at all, but the consulate bombing clearly crossed a red line. The Iranian government's attack on Israel didn't kill anyone, but did injure a 7-year-old Bedouin girl in the Negev. So, and we do have also here, I don't want to go through this whole article because some of it is just a repeat, but Biden did say that it has made very clear that he doesn't plan to support an Israeli attack on Iran. A senior Biden administration official told reporters, according to the Times of Israel, Israel really came out far ahead in this exchange. It took out the IRGC leadership in the Levant. Iran tried to respond, and Israel clearly demonstrated its military superiority, defeating this attack, particularly in coordination with its partners. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to look at what's happened over the past 72 hours or so in the Middle East and declare Iran or Israel is the winner of it, just like you have the U.S. doing here. In one sense, you know, the point that the U.S. makes is largely correct. Israel scored a pretty big blow on Iran by taking out this senior IRGC leader. They destroyed the Iranian consulate building in Syria, and at the same time, Iran carries out, you know, they launch a whole bunch of drones at Israel, and some missiles, but nearly all the drones are intercepted, and they just destroy or, you know, do a little bit of damage to an Israeli airbase. And so, in some sense, again, it suggests that the Israelis really came out ahead here. Now, there's a different way that people are looking at this, and it may be the correct way to look at it, which is, with the Iranian attack, the point wasn't necessarily to do damage, but to do 2 things. One, carry out a major and very public attack on Israel, which is a significant thing to do, right? And I'm sure for the Israelis, many people living in Israel, it was a very real and very serious wake-up call that Iran would conduct such a large attack in Israel. Now, most of the drones and missiles were shot down. I think if you ask somebody who either is a supporter of Iran, or maybe just an unbiased commentator on the situation, some of those people do believe that what Iran did really is establish deterrence here, and that the Israelis probably received the message that Iran's missiles are capable of bypassing and their just overall strategy here, because the drones were meant to disrupt and to be taken out, right? They were meant to be destroyed by the Israeli, American, Jordanian, UK air defenses, and they essentially clear the road for the missiles. And if these people's commentary is correct, that what Iran proved was that its missiles can get past the Israeli air defenses and wreak havoc in Israel, then maybe Iran did establish some sort of deterrence there, and that may be something that the Israelis are uncomfortable with, and now they're going to look to escalate to prove, oh no, we're the ones with deterrence, although this could just turn into an outright war. Now, a couple things on the U.S. saying that they're not going to support Israel in any offensive attack, but just defensive. A part of being able to carry out offensive attacks is the ability to have a very strong defense, right? If you carry out an attack, a raid on some place, and you have no ability to defend against the counterattack that's coming your way, well, then the raid is a really stupid thing to do. And so from the Israeli perspective, I'm sure even the Americans say, hey, we got your back on defense, is a significant pledge. It's not the same thing. I don't want to say, as the U.S. saying, oh, we got your back and we're going to help you to attack Iran. It's not. And I think the U.S. and Biden probably don't want the U.S. or Israel to attack Iran and start this wider war in the Middle East. At the same time, they're not telling the Israelis that they're, if they attack Iran, then they're on their own, which is what they really should say. Biden should call Netanyahu and say, hey, if you want to escalate this more, you're on your own. Sorry, good luck. We wish you the best. We hope you win, but we will not be helping. We cannot finance this war, and we cannot fight a war against Iran for you. Unfortunately, I don't think that's likely to happen. So I will say, I think there's two possibilities here. One is that we see an Israeli response to Iran in sometime soon. And, I think this could come in one of two forms. One would be something escalatory, where Israel does carry out a major attack inside Iran, or tries to maybe take out a lot of Iranian officials, say in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon and Yemen, or something, like a major attack across the Middle East. Maybe they try to do something more minor. They just hit a couple Iranian targets in Syria and declare, oh, we struck back, just to make the Israelis' feelings feel better. That's not impossible. My concern is that it will be an attack on Iran. Now, I think the other possibility is that maybe this is theater, that the Israelis and the Americans did receive some sort of deterrence message here from Iran, and the point is, for the American perspective, Biden could look tough reining in Netanyahu. Oh, he wants to go to war with Iran, but I told him, Bibi, you can't do that. It's a foolish move. We've been friends for many years, and let me tell you something, this would be bad for Israel. Where in Bibi's situation, where he can't actually really respond against Iran without creating a major war that's going to do a lot of damage to Israel, he decides that he gets to look like the little guy whose friend is holding him back, going, let me at him, but at the same time really having no intention or wanting the fight anyways. So I do think those dynamics could play out, and I do think that Netanyahu could be playing Biden on this, where not only is Netanyahu going to say that the Biden administration is holding them back and restraining restraining the Israelis. But then when it comes to election time and the American elections and American politics, the Israelis, I think, are going to suggest, well, this old Biden guy is kind of weak now. We really would like the Trump back, and support Trump for that reason. All right, one more story here about the actual attack. Israel's missile defense against Iran estimated to cost over $1 billion. The activation of Israeli air defenses in response to an overnight Iranian drone and missile attack likely cost over $1 billion, according to an Israeli brigadier general. He is the former financial advisor to the IDF's chief of staff. The Iranian attack came in response to the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus, led to the Israeli activating several types of air defense systems, including Arrow, David's Sling, and the Iron Dome. If we are talking about ballistic missiles that need to be brought down with the Arrow system, cruise missiles that need to be brought down with other missiles, and UAVs, which we actually bring down with many airplanes, and then that costs up to $3.5 million for Arrow missiles, $1 million for David's Sling, and such is the cost for airplanes. An order of magnitude 4 to 5 billion shekels, $1 to $3 billion. The general told Ynet, an Israeli outlet. The US, UK, and Jordan also helped intercept drones. Israel claims that over 99% of the 300 drones and missiles fired from Iran were intercepted, but some got through and damaged an Israeli airbase in southern Israel, and only one person was injured. For the Iranian side, launching the attack was significantly less than Israel's defense. According to Middle East Eye, some estimates put the number at 10% of what it cost Israel to defend itself from the attack. And I guess one thing to add on that, just the 99% number, that seems to be an overestimate, but 95% does seem about correct. So it's probably in the 90s of what the Israelis were able to intercept. Now, again, from the Iranian perspective, not every single one of those was ever expected to go through. It's like if you're playing a game of chess, the drones are the pawns. They're meant to clear the road for the more sophisticated, more expensive, and more effective munitions. Next up here, Speaker Johnson says House will vote on more Israel aid this week. House Speaker Mike Johnson said Sunday that he will bring a bill to provide Israel with more military aid to the House floor this week in response to Iran's attack, which came in retaliation for Israel bombing Tehran's consulate in Damascus. Johnson said in an interview with Fox News, House Republicans and the Republican Party understand the necessity of standing with Israel. We're going to try again this week, and details of that package are being put together. Right now, we're looking at options and all these supplemental issues. It is unclear if he plans to lump the Israeli aid in with spending for Ukraine. The House is yet to vote on a $95 billion foreign military bill that passed through the Senate and includes $60 billion for Ukraine, $14 billion for Israel, and a few billion for Taiwan and other spending in the Asia-Pacific region. Johnson previously pushed forward 2 standalone Israeli aid bills to support the slaughter and starvation of the Palestinians in Gaza, but they did not become law. One was for $14 billion that cut funding to the IRFs to offset costs, which passed the House but wasn't taken up in the Senate because the Democrats love the IRS. Another bill for $17.6 billion for Israel failed to pass a vote on a House that required a 2/3 majority, and this was because a lot of Democrats don't want a standalone bill. They want the Israeli bill to include aid for Ukraine. And that's what's in this next article here. This one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com, April 15th. White House says it opposes standalone Israel military aid bill. So the White House on Monday said that it opposes the idea of a bill that would give an additional military aid to Israel without funding Ukraine and Taiwan. The White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby said, "We are opposed to a standalone bill that will work on Israel as we've seen proposed. We would oppose a standalone bill." Kirby's comments came a day after House Speaker Mike Johnson said he would work on getting more aid to Israel this week in the wake of Iran's attack on Israeli territory, which came in retaliation for the bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus. Later on Monday, the AP reported that Johnson told fellow GOP lawmakers that he plans to bring the package for the floor this week, but will hold separate votes on funding for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Back in February, the Senate passed a $95 billion military aid bill that included $60 billion for the proxy war in Ukraine, $14 billion for the Israeli slaughter of Palestinians, and a $50 billion for Taiwan and other spending in the Asia Pacific. While Johnson wants to hold separate votes, his plan is expected to send about the same amount of money to each country, and each measure will likely pass. He has been trying to increase pressure from the White House and congressional hawks in both parties to bring a $95 billion bill to the floor for a vote. So this will be interesting. I think what will likely happen is that Johnson will essentially cave and just go ahead and bring a bill very similar to the $95 billion bill to the floor. I don't know if it'll be the same one. It'll probably have to be taken up and passed again in the Senate, but I do think they're going to end up lumping all this money together and passing this, World War bill, essentially. Next up here, UN says no improvement in aid access to northern Gaza. A UN official overseeing relief efforts in Gaza said aid access has not improved in the northern part of the Strip and pushed back on Israel's claims that the UN was to blame for the difficulty in distributing aid. Jamie McGoldrick, a UN humanitarian coordinator, said that the responsibility for the occupying power when it comes to providing humanitarian assistance for the starving Palestinians only ends when aid reaches the civilians in Gaza. It's very easy for Israel to say, we've sent you 1,000 trucks, so please deliver them inside of Gaza, McGoldrick added. He said that the distribution inside of Gaza was difficult due to the security vacuum and delays due to Israel's checkpoints. Aid workers have also frequently been targeted by Israeli forces, as 177 employees of the UN Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, have been killed since October 7th. 200 aid workers have been killed in total overall. And just last week, there was a situation where I want to say it was either UNICEF it was UNICEF. One of their vehicles had turned back after being hit by Israeli gunfire near a checkpoint. So McGoldrick made the comments on Friday, the same day Israel announced it was starting to let aid into northern Gaza through a new border crossing. Israel initially said it wouldn't open the Eretz border crossing to allow trucks into the northern part of the Strip, but opened the crossing at a different location, which it didn't specify. The Israeli military also declined to say how many trucks have been allowed through the new crossing, so it's unclear if it's making an impact. McGoldrick said, "We've been asking for this for months. We've been calling out the fact that there's a real humanitarian crisis in the north where famine is imminent. It's only now we start these announcements." And so next up, I want to get into a statement by the head of USAID, Samantha Power. Head of USAID says Palestinians in North Gaza are already experiencing famine. So this is from Day to Camp on April 11th. Samantha Power, the head of U.S. Agency for International Development, that's USAID, said Wednesday that some parts of northern Gaza are already experiencing famine, which has been created by Israel's U.S.-backed bombardment and siege of the Gaza Strip. Power made the comments in a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing when asked about a cable sent by USAID to other government agencies that said famine was already likely taking place in parts of northern Gaza and called the spread of hunger and disease an unprecedented in modern history. Power said the cable was based on a report from the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, that's the IPC, and that's the international UN watchdog on hunger and starvation, and told lawmakers the assessment was credible. When asked if it meant that famine was already occurring in northern Gaza, she replied yes. Food has not flowed in sufficient quantities to avoid the imminent famine in the south, and these conditions that are giving rise to child deaths in the north. Despite a top U.S. official acknowledging that famine is occurring in Gaza, the U.S. continues to support Israel's genocidal campaign. President Biden has refused to call for a ceasefire that's not linked to a hostage deal with Hamas, and he walked back comments that suggested he was not calling for a unilateral truce to get more aid into Gaza. Last week, Israel said that it would take steps to increase the flow of aid in Gaza, including open border crossing into northern Gaza, and allow shipments to come through Israel's port of Ashdod, but neither commitment has been implemented. And, as we talked about, the UN said that it hasn't resulted in more aid getting into Gaza at this point. All right, next up here, Israeli forces killed 5 Palestinians trying to return to North Gaza. 5 Palestinians were killed and 52 were wounded on Sunday when Israeli forces opened fire on a crowd trying to return to northern Gaza. The AP reported citing officials with the Al-Da hospital in central Gaza. Thousands of displaced Palestinians attempted to return to northern Gaza on Sunday after they heard rumors that Israeli forces were allowing people in, but their hopes were dashed when Israeli troops opened fire on the crowd, and the Israeli military issued a new warning: do not attempt to make the trek north. Israeli military spokesperson wrote on X that northern Gaza is a dangerous combat zone and said that all displaced Palestinians should stay in the south. While the UN estimates that 84% of the homes in northern Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, Palestinians who fled the area 6 months ago are tired of being displaced and want to return. We want our homes, we want our lives, we want to return, whether there is a truce or without a truce, said a Palestinian who spoke with the AP. The issue of displaced Palestinians has been a major obstacle in the indirect ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel. Hamas wants the free movement of Palestinians in the Strip so that those who desire can return north, but Israel has rejected those conditions. Israel has constructed a road separating northern Gaza from the rest of the Strip and plans to maintain military control of the corridor indefinitely, signaling plans for a long-term military occupation. Let's talk about that buffer zone a little more. Israel has destroyed nearly all buildings in Gaza's buffer zone. So Israel has destroyed nearly every building in Gaza along the Strip's border with Israel to create a buffer zone, a plan that will result in Israel taking a significant chunk of Gaza's territory. A report from the United Nations Satellite Center found that Israel has damaged or destroyed 90% of the buildings in Gaza within a 1 kilometer of the border as of February 29th. It found that 3,033 buildings were completely demolished, 330 were seriously damaged, and 266 were moderately damaged. According to Haaretz, the real number of demolished buildings is likely higher since Israeli forces are actually creating the buffer zone within 1,200 meters within Gaza, 200 meters further inside the Strip than what the UN actually examined. And then, of course, there's the other buffer zone that runs between North and South Gaza along the former main highway in Gaza, and they're destroying everything, I think, 1 kilometer to the north and south of that border as well. So Israeli forces have framed the buffer zone as necessary to prevent future October 7th style attacks, but is likely part of Israel's long-term plans to control Gaza and potentially establish new settlements in the Strip. And that's the story we have up next. Israeli member of Knesset said there are secret plans to establish Israeli settlements in Gaza. So a member of the Israeli Knesset and the hardline Jewish Power Party has said there are secret Israeli plans to establish settlements in the Gaza Strip, the New Arab reported on Wednesday. The member of the Knesset told the Knesset's TV channel that there was a vision for the day after the war on Gaza, and that the optimistic vision is the renewal of the settlements of Gaza. Of course, this will happen in stages. I think this will happen whether we like it or not. She said that she was speaking about secret matters because we can see the large opposition from external parties. She added that starting in the next session of the Knesset, you will see practical steps, including plans and work in government offices and security services. There is intensive work behind the scenes on this. Other members of the Israeli Knesset and ministers in the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have not been shy about their desire to re-establish settlements in Gaza. In January, 12 ministers and 15 MKs attended a conference on the settlement of Gaza. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security and the leader of the Jewish Power Party, spoke at the conference and called on Netanyahu to take steps to allow for settlements. If we don't voluntarily immigrate Palestinians and impose death sentences on terrorists, I turn to you, Netanyahu. This is a time for brave decisions. The MK, at a similar conference back in November 2023, called for Israel to conquer the entire Gaza Strip. She said there is no escape from returning and fully controlling the Gaza Strip, full control that includes extensive and flourishing settlements in the entire strip. And so this is just the Israelis being very explicit about their plans to depopulate Gaza of Palestinians. Ethnic cleansing, genocide is what they're saying. All right, last story up here today. Gantz says middle school age Israeli children will one day fight in Gaza. This is an unbelievable little piece that Dave DeCamp wrote up here. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz said on Wednesday, Gantz, remember, is supposed to be the moderate alternative to Netanyahu, that Israeli children in middle school, who range from the age of 12 to 15 years old, will one day be fighting in the Gaza Strip. The war with Hamas will take time. Youth in middle school will one day fight in the Gaza Strip, as in Judea and Samaria, which is what the Israelis call the West Bank, and against Lebanon, he told Israeli media, while predicting Israel's brutal campaign in Gaza will last for years and years to come. Gantz also claimed that Israel was beating Hamas, but the truth must be clear. The head must be high for our achievements. Military-wise, Hamas is defeated, its fighters are eliminated or in hiding, its abilities are cut off. We will continue to hit whatever is left. Victory will come step by step. We are on our way to it, and it won't stop, he said. Gantz has vowed that Israel will invade southern Gaza city of Rafah, which is packed with over 1 million Palestinians. He said, we will go on to Rafah, we will return to Khan Yunis, and we will operate in Gaza. Anywhere there will be terrorist targets, the IDF will be there. Our freedom of operation in Gaza will remain, be preserved, and it will be used. Gantz is the leader of the National Unity Party, became a member of Netanyahu's war cabinet after October 7th, but he is considered one of the prime minister's main political rivals. Last month, Gantz traveled to the U.S. to meet with U.S. officials on a trip that was not approved by Netanyahu. Gantz also recently called for new elections, echoing a call made by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and other Democrats in the U.S. who are major Israeli supporters but are critical of Netanyahu. And as I've talked about on the show quite a bit, I think the plan here for the U.S. and particularly for the Democrats is, once all this is over, to say, oh, this is really ugly, this is really awful, but blame everything on Netanyahu and keep Israel support, U.S. support to Israel at the same level. All right, everyone, that's where I'm wrapping up the show for today. Thank you so much. I'll be out with another show tomorrow.